The dust devil rose from the canyon floor like a serpent of gold as Caroline Porter watched her father's wagon disappear over the ridge, leaving her utterly alone on the trading post road between Georgetown, Colorado, and the scattered homesteads beyond. She had insisted she could walk the final 3 miles to the Hendersons' ranch, where she was meant to help with the birth of their first child, refusing to make her ailing father turn his mules around when he had already driven 2 hours out of his way. That decision, made in the stubborn confidence of her 22 years, now seemed like the foolishness of a city girl who had spent too long back east learning medicine, and not enough time remembering the merciless nature of a Colorado summer. The sun hung overhead like a brass coin hammered flat against the endless blue, and Caroline could feel the heat radiating up from the packed earth through the thin soles of her traveling boots. She had been walking for what felt like hours, though her father's wagon had disappeared only 40 minutes earlier according to the small watch pinned to her bodice. The canteen at her hip had been half empty when she started, and now only a few drops remained, each one precious as liquid gold. The landscape around her shimmered and danced, the scrub brush and scattered pines wavering in the heat like figures in a dream. She knew she should stop, should find shade and wait out the worst of the afternoon heat, but the Hendersons were expecting her. Mary Henderson was only 17 and terrified, and Caroline had promised she would be there. She pressed forward, each step requiring more effort than the last, her gray traveling dress clinging to her back with perspiration that dried almost as soon as it formed, leaving salt stains across the fabric. Her vision began to narrow at the edges, a creeping darkness that she recognized from her medical training as a dangerous sign. She fumbled for her canteen with trembling fingers, but it was already empty, had been empty for the last half-mile. The rational part of her mind, the part that had studied anatomy and physiology under Dr. Morrison in Philadelphia, knew exactly what was happening to her body. Dehydration, heat exhaustion, dangerous, potentially fatal. She tried to call out, though, for whom she did not know. This road saw perhaps 1 traveler a day, if that. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat too dry to produce sound. The darkness at the edges of her vision spread inward, and Caroline felt her knees buckle. She had time to think that this was a very stupid way to die, and then the ground rushed up to meet her. Cade Sullivan had been tracking the wild mustang herd for 3 days, following their trail from the high meadows down toward the water sources in the lower valleys. At 26, he had spent more than half his life learning to read the land, first as a scout during the final years of the Indian campaigns, then as a horse breaker and rancher working to build something of his own in this hard country. His ranch, small but growing, sat 5 miles northwest of Georgetown, tucked into a valley with good water and grass enough for the horses he caught and trained. The mustangs had been moving south, which puzzled him until he realized that someone must have spooked them from their usual watering hole. Probably those dam prospectors who had been digging up every creek bed within 20 miles, chasing rumors of silver and leaving destruction in their wake. He had lost the trail near Rabbit Canyon and decided to cut across toward the trading post road, figuring he would pick up their tracks again near 3 Springs. That was when he saw the figure in gray lying motionless in the middle of the road. For a moment his hand went to the rifle in his saddle boot, old instincts from his scouting days dying hard. But then he saw the way the fabric of the dress spread around the fallen figure, and he was spurring his horse forward, the mustangs forgotten. He was off his mount before it had fully stopped, dropping to his knees beside the woman. She was young, her face flushed an alarming red, her lips cracked and dry. He pressed his fingers to the side of her throat and felt the rapid, thready pulse that told him she was alive but in serious trouble. Cade looked around quickly, assessing the situation. The sun was merciless here, no shade for 100 yards in any direction. But there was an outcropping of rock about 50 yards off the road, on the western side where the afternoon shadow would provide relief. He slipped one arm under her knees and the other behind her shoulders, lifting her with an ease born of years of hard physical labor. She was lighter than he expected, and he felt a surge of anger at whoever had let this woman walk alone in this heat. His horse followed as he carried her toward the rocks, well trained enough not to need leading. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the unnatural heat radiating from her skin even through the fabric of her dress. Heat exhaustion, maybe heat stroke. Either could kill her if he did not act fast. The shadow of the outcropping provided immediate relief from the direct sun. Cade laid her down carefully on the hardpack in the deepest shade, then turned to grab his gear from his horse. He had 2 full canteens, thank God. He always carried extra water in this country, had seen too many people die for lack of it. He knelt beside her again and carefully lifted her head, supporting it with one hand while he brought the canteen to her lips with the other. At first the water just ran down her chin, but then her throat convulsed in an automatic swallow. Good. He gave her small amounts, patient, knowing that too much too fast could make her sick. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Cade dampened his bandana with water and laid it across her forehead, then wet another cloth from his saddlebag and wiped it gently over her face and neck. Slowly, gradually, he saw some of the angry red flush begin to fade from her cheeks. While he worked, he studied her face. She was beautiful in a way that seemed out of place in this harsh country, with delicate features that spoke of good breeding and an easier life. Her dress, though dusty and stained with salt, was well made, the fabric of good quality. Her hands were slender, the nails clean and trimmed. Not a ranch wife, then. Not a settler's daughter. So what was she doing walking alone on a back road in the middle of a summer afternoon? He gave her more water a little at a time. Her color was improving, and her pulse, when he checked it again, seemed slightly stronger. He settled back against the rock and prepared to wait. The Hendersons' place was about 3 miles up the road, he figured, based on their location and the direction she had been heading. He would get her there once she woke, and he was sure she could travel safely. An hour passed, then another. The shadow lengthened as the sun crept westward. Cade kept vigil, checking her pulse and breathing at regular intervals, giving her water whenever she seemed to swallow on her own. His horse grazed peacefully on the sparse grass nearby, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. Otherwise the world was silent. He found himself studying her face again, drawn by something he could not quite name. There was intelligence there, he thought, even in unconsciousness. Character in the set of her jaw, determination in the firm line of her mouth. Her hair, dark as coffee, had partially escaped its pins and lay in waves across the rock. Without thinking, he reached out and moved a strand away from her face, then pulled his hand back, wondering at himself. It was not like him to be fanciful about women. He had known a few, of course, enjoyed their company when he rode into Georgetown or Denver, but he had never been one to lose his head over a pretty face. His life was his ranch, his horses, the hard work of building something that would last. There was no room for softness, for the kind of yearning that made a man stupid. Yet something about this woman, lying vulnerable and unconscious in the shadow of the rock, stirred something in his chest that he could not quite dismiss. The sun was well on its way toward the western peaks when her eyelids finally fluttered open. Cade saw the confusion in her gray eyes, the moment of panic as she tried to understand where she was and what had happened. Easy, he said, his voice low and calm. You are safe. You collapsed from the heat. I have been giving you water. She blinked at him, her eyes trying to focus. The Hendersons. I need to get to the Hendersons. Mary is having her baby. Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, but the urgency in it was clear. Cade shook his head. You are in no condition to walk anywhere. You nearly died out there. You do not understand. She tried to sit up, and Cade put a hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly holding her down. What I understand is that you will not help anyone if you are dead, he said. Mary Henderson will have to wait until you can stand without falling over. Caroline stared up at the man who had apparently saved her life. He was tall. She could tell even with him kneeling beside her, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who made his living through physical work. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting into distances. Those eyes were a startling blue, lighter than seemed natural, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. How long was I unconscious? She asked. Near 3 hours, he replied. The sun will be down in another 2. If you can manage it, I will take you to the Hendersons on my horse. But you need to drink more water first, and I need to be sure you can sit upright without passing out again. 3 hours. Caroline felt a surge of guilt and worry. Mary must be terrified. She had sent word 2 weeks ago that the baby was coming soon, and Caroline had promised to be there. The man held out the canteen again. Slow sips, he instructed. I know you want to gulp it down, but slow is better. She took the canteen with shaking hands and drank, forcing herself to go slowly even though every cell in her body screamed for water. He was right, of course. She had been foolish to push herself the way she had. The signs had all been there, her body warning her, and she had ignored them out of stubbornness and pride. I am Caroline Porter, she said when she had drunk enough to soothe her throat. I am a midwife, trained in Philadelphia. I came out to Colorado 6 months ago to help my father. He runs the assay office in Georgetown. Cade Sullivan, he replied. I have a horse ranch northwest of town. I was tracking mustangs when I found you. I am grateful, Caroline said. Truly, you saved my life. Something flickered in those blue eyes, but his expression remained neutral. Anyone would have done the same. I am not so certain of that, Caroline replied, thinking of the stories she had heard about this territory, about people who would rob a person in distress rather than help them. Nevertheless, I am in your debt. Cade shook his head. No debt. Just do not do anything that foolish again. Despite everything, Caroline felt a spark of irritation at his tone. I am perfectly aware that what I did was unwise. You do not need to lecture me as if I were a child. Then do not act like one, Cade said bluntly. This country does not forgive mistakes. You should know that. Caroline bit back a sharp retort, recognizing the truth in his words even if she did not appreciate the delivery. She took another slow drink of water and tried again to sit up. This time Cade allowed it, though he kept one hand hovering near her shoulder, ready to steady her if she swayed. The world tilted alarmingly for a moment, but then steadied. Caroline took a deep breath and then another. I think I can manage now, she said. Cade studied her critically, his gaze moving over her face as if assessing her color and condition. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded. All right, I will take you to the Hendersons, but if you start feeling dizzy or sick, you tell me immediately. Understood? Understood, Caroline agreed. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses rough against her palm, and let him pull her to her feet. For a moment she swayed, and his arm came around her waist, steadying her. I am all right, she said, though in truth the world still felt slightly unsteady. Just give me a moment. They stood like that, his arm supporting her, while she waited for her balance to fully return. She was acutely aware of his closeness, of the strength in the arm that held her, of the faint smell of leather and horse and sun-warmed skin. It had been a long time since she had been this close to a man, and the awareness made her uncomfortable in a way she could not quite define. When she felt steady enough, she stepped back and his arm fell away. "Thank you," she said. "I believe I am ready now." Cade went to his horse and swung up into the saddle with easy grace, then held his hand down to her. "Put your foot on my boot and I will pull you up," he instructed. Caroline had never ridden double on a horse before, and it took her 2 attempts before she managed to get herself situated behind him in the saddle. "Hold on to me," Cade said over his shoulder. "This road is rough in places." She hesitated for only a moment before wrapping her arms around his waist. Through the fabric of his shirt she could feel the solid warmth of him, the muscles of his back and sides. He urged the horse forward at an easy walk, mindful of her condition. They rode in silence for a while, the afternoon light turning golden as the sun sank lower. Caroline felt her head beginning to droop, exhaustion pulling at her, and she forced herself to stay alert. The rhythmic movement of the horse was soothing, and despite her best efforts, she found her cheek resting against Cade's shoulder. "How did you come to be a midwife?" His voice pulled her back from the edge of sleep. "My mother died giving birth to my younger brother when I was 16, Caroline said quietly. "The doctor was drunk, and he made mistakes that killed them both. I decided then that I would learn to do better, so that other women would not have to suffer as my mother did." She felt Cade's back stiffen slightly under her cheek. "I am sorry," he said. "That is a hard thing for a young girl to witness." "It was," Caroline agreed, "but it gave me purpose. I went to Philadelphia to study with Dr. Morrison, who believes that women make natural midwives and physicians. I spent 4 years learning everything he could teach me, and then I came back to help my father." "Your father," Cade said. "He is the one who let you walk alone in this heat." "He did not let me," Caroline corrected, a hint of steel in her voice. "I insisted. He has been ill with lung fever, and I did not want him to exhaust himself driving me all the way to the Hendersons when I am perfectly capable of walking." "Clearly," Cade said dryly. Caroline felt her irritation flare again. "I made a mistake. I have acknowledged that. Must you continue to remind me of it? If it keeps you from making the same mistake again, then yes," Cade replied. They rode in tense silence for several minutes. Then Caroline said, "You are infuriating." "So I have been told," Cade replied, and she could hear the hint of amusement in his voice. Despite herself, Caroline felt a smile tugging at her lips. There was something oddly refreshing about his bluntness. After years of dealing with the careful politeness of Philadelphia society and the overly solicitous men who had courted her there. Cade Sullivan said exactly what he thought, without artifice or pretense, and while it was irritating, it was also strangely honest. "How did you come to have a horse ranch?" she asked, deciding that if they were going to be riding together for the next hour, they might as well be civil. "I worked as a scout for the army when I was younger," Cade said. "Saved my pay, learned the country. When I mustered out 5 years ago, I bought a parcel of land in a good valley and started catching mustangs. I break them and train them, then sell them to ranchers and the cavalry. It is hard work, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice and something else, independence, self-sufficiency, the satisfaction of a man who had built something through his own effort. "You work alone?" Caroline asked. "Mostly," Cade said. "I hire help during roundup and when I have a large string to break, but otherwise it is just me. I prefer it that way." "That sounds lonely," Caroline observed. Cade shrugged, and she felt the movement against her cheek. I like my own company. I do not need people around me all the time to feel content. Still, Caroline said, it must be nice sometimes to have someone to talk to share your day with. I have my horses, Cade said. They are better conversationalists than most people I know. Caroline laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. She could not remember the last time she had laughed, not really. The last 6 months in Colorado had been hard, her father's illness weighing on her, the struggle to establish herself as a midwife in a community that was suspicious of her Eastern training and modern ideas. You have a nice laugh, Cade said, and there was something in his voice that made Caroline's heart skip. She did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. They rode on through the lengthening shadows, and Caroline felt something shifting in the air between them, something tentative and fragile but undeniably present. The Hendersons' homestead came into view just as the sun touched the tops of the western peaks. It was a modest place, a log cabin with a sod roof and a small barn, surrounded by a split-rail fence. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a milk cow grazed in a nearby pasture. Smoke rose from the chimney, and even from a distance Caroline could hear the low sound of a woman moaning. "That is Mary," she said, urgency flooding back. "We need to hurry." Cade urged his horse into a faster walk, and within minutes they were pulling up in front of the cabin. The door opened before they could dismount, and Tom Henderson appeared, his young face pale with worry. "Miss Porter, thank God," he said. "Mary has been calling for you. The pain started early this morning, and they have been getting worse." Cade dismounted and then helped Caroline down, his hands steady on her waist. She swayed slightly when her feet hit the ground and his grip tightened. "Are you certain you are well enough for this?" he asked quietly. "I have to be," Caroline replied. She looked up at him, meeting those startling blue eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan, for everything." "Cade," he corrected. "Just Cade." "Then you must call me Caroline," she replied. For a moment they stood there, his hand still on her waist, something passing between them that had no name. Then Tom Henderson called out again, and the moment broke. "I should go," Caroline said. "I will wait," Cade told her. "To make sure everything is all right and to see you safely back to town." "That is not necessary," Caroline began, but Cade cut her off. "Nevertheless, I will wait." There was no point arguing with him, Caroline realized. And truthfully, she was grateful for his presence, though she would not have admitted it aloud. She turned and hurried into the cabin, pulling her medical bag from where it had been secured to Cade's saddle. Inside, the cabin was dim and hot. Mary Henderson lay on a narrow bed in the corner, her face contorted with pain. She was even younger than Caroline had remembered, barely more than a child herself, and fear radiated from her in waves. "I am here, Mary," Caroline said, going to her side. "Everything is going to be fine. Let me examine you and see how far along you are." The examination revealed that Mary was well into labor, the baby positioned correctly. Caroline felt a wave of relief. With luck and careful management, this would be a straightforward birth. She worked through the night, coaching Mary through the contractions, monitoring the baby's progress. Tom hovered anxiously until Caroline finally sent him outside, telling him he would be more help fetching water and keeping the fire going. Through the cabin's small window, she could see Cade sitting on the porch, his hat tipped low, apparently prepared to wait as long as necessary. Something about his presence was comforting, knowing he was there. Mary's labor progressed normally, though the girl was exhausted and frightened. Caroline talked to her constantly, reassuring her, explaining what was happening, giving her focus and courage. She had attended dozens of births in Philadelphia, but each one still felt like a small miracle, a moment of standing at the threshold between life and death. Just before dawn, Mary gave a final push and the baby slipped into Caroline's waiting hands. A boy, small but healthy, his cry loud and indignant. Caroline cleaned him quickly and wrapped him in a soft cloth, then placed him in Mary's arms. "You did beautifully," she told the exhausted new mother. "He is perfect." Mary stared down at her son with wonder, tears streaming down her face. Tom rushed in at the sound of the baby's cry, and Caroline discreetly turned away to give them a moment of privacy, cleaning up and packing her instruments. When everything was settled and Mary was resting comfortably, Caroline finally allowed herself to step outside. The eastern sky was pale with approaching dawn, and Cade was standing by his horse, checking the cinch on his saddle. "A boy," she told him. "Both mother and baby are doing well." "Good," Cade said. He studied her face in the growing light. "You look exhausted." "It was a long night," Caroline admitted, "but a good one." "Can you ride?" Cade asked. "I should get you back to Georgetown before your father worries." Caroline had forgotten about her father in the intensity of the night's work. Guilt flooded through her. "Yes, we should go." Tom Henderson came out to thank them both, pressing a few coins into Caroline's hand despite her protests. "It is all I can spare right now," he said, "but we are grateful, Miss Porter, truly." "You take care of Mary and that baby," Caroline told him. "That is payment enough." They rode back toward Georgetown in the cool of the morning, Caroline once again seated behind Cade, her arms around his waist. She was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open, and several times she caught herself drifting, her head nodding against his shoulder. "Sleep if you need to," Cade said quietly. "I will not let you fall." It was perhaps the exhaustion, or the emotional intensity of the night's work, or simply the feeling of safety that came from his solid presence. But Caroline found herself doing exactly that. She rested her cheek against his back and let her eyes close, trusting him to see her safely home. She woke when the horse stopped, blinking in confusion. They were in Georgetown, in front of the small house her father rented near the assay office. The sun was fully up now, and the town was beginning to stir. Cade helped her down from the horse, and this time when her feet touched the ground she was steady. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him, "for everything, for saving my life, for waiting, for bringing me home." "It was no trouble," Cade replied, but his eyes were warm. "Will I see you again?" Caroline asked, and then felt herself flush at her own forwardness. Something shifted in Cade's expression. "Would you like to?" "Yes," Caroline said simply. "I would." "Then you will," Cade promised. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of farewell and turned his horse back toward the road. Caroline watched him ride away, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. She had not come to Colorado looking for romance. Her focus had been on her work, on building her practice and caring for her father. But Cade Sullivan had appeared in her life like a force of nature, unexpected and undeniable. She went inside to find her father awake and worried. She reassured him that all was well, told him an abbreviated version of the previous day's events, and then collapsed into her bed, asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. Over the following weeks, Cade found reasons to come to Georgetown more often than was strictly necessary. He told himself it was because he needed supplies, or because he had horses to sell, or because he wanted to check on prices at the assay office. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He wanted to see Caroline Porter again. He would catch glimpses of her around town, often hurrying to attend to a patient, her medical bag in hand. Sometimes she was at her father's house, and he would tip his hat to her as he rode past. Once he encountered her at the general store, and they spoke for nearly an hour about everything and nothing, until the storekeeper pointedly began closing up for the night. Caroline found herself looking for him, her heart giving a little leap whenever she saw a tall figure on horseback. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew this man, that she had no time for romantic entanglements. But her heart paid no attention to such sensible arguments. It was nearly a month after their first meeting when Cade finally worked up the courage to do what he had been planning since the day he carried her to shade and watched her wake. He cleaned himself up, put on his best shirt, and rode into Georgetown with a specific purpose. He found Caroline at her father's house, tending to the small garden she had planted behind the cabin. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and her face lit with a smile that made his heart stutter. "Cade," she said, brushing dirt from her hands, "this is a pleasant surprise." "Caroline," he replied, dismounting, "I was wondering if you might consider taking a ride with me tomorrow. There is a place I would like to show you, up in the high meadows. The wildflowers are in bloom and the view is something to see." He watched her face carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. For a moment she hesitated and he felt his hopes sink. But then she smiled again, wider this time. "I would like that very much," she said. "What time should I be ready?" "Early morning," Cade said, "before the heat of the day. I will bring an extra horse for you." "I will be ready," Caroline promised. That night, Caroline barely slept. She told herself she was being ridiculous, acting like a girl half her age, but she could not help the flutter of excitement in her stomach. She chose her riding clothes carefully, a practical split skirt and a simple blouse, and braided her hair to keep it out of her face. Cade arrived just as the sun was breaking over the eastern peaks, leading a gentle mare for Caroline to ride. He had packed a lunch in his saddlebags and 2 full canteens of water. "I learned my lesson," Caroline said with a wry smile, seeing the canteens. "I am glad to hear it," Cade replied, his eyes crinkling with amusement. They rode out of Georgetown as the town was waking, heading northwest into the mountains. The morning air was cool and sweet, and Caroline felt her spirits lifting with every mile. Cade was an easy companion, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the country they rode through. The meadow he took her to was worth every minute of the ride. It spread across a high valley, carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable, blue lupine and red paintbrush and yellow columbine. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. A stream ran through the middle of the meadow, clear and cold from the snowmelt. "It is beautiful," Caroline breathed. "I thought you would appreciate it," Cade said. He dismounted and helped her down, and they led the horses to the stream to drink. They spent the day in that meadow, talking and laughing, sharing the lunch Cade had brought. They spoke about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Caroline told him about Philadelphia, about the rigid society she had left behind, about the men who had courted her and found her too independent, too educated, too unwilling to be the quiet, obedient wife they wanted. Cade told her about his years as a scout, about the things he had seen and done, some of which he was proud of and some of which haunted him. He spoke about his dream of building his ranch into something that would last, something he could pass on to his children someday, if he ever had any. "Why have you not married?" Caroline asked. "Surely there are women in Georgetown who would be interested," Cade shrugged. "I never met anyone who made me want to give up my solitude," he said. He looked at her directly. "Until now." Caroline felt her breath catch. "Cade," she said softly. He moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the different shades of blue in his eyes. "I know it has only been a month," he said. "I know this is too fast, probably too foolish. But Caroline, I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day I found you on that road. You are brave and intelligent and beautiful, and when I am with you, I feel like maybe my life could be more than just horses and hard work." "I feel the same," Caroline admitted. I've tried to tell myself it is impractical, that I should focus on my work and my father, but the truth is that I look for you everywhere I go. When I see you, the whole day seems brighter." Cade reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked. "Yes," Caroline whispered. He kissed her softly at first, tentative, as if afraid she might break. But Caroline was not fragile, and she kissed him back with all the passion she had been holding inside. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a long moment the rest of the world ceased to exist. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Cade rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right." "I would like that," Caroline replied. They rode back to Georgetown in the golden light of late afternoon, holding hands across the distance between their horses. When Cade left her at her father's house, he kissed her again, a promise of more to come. The courtship that followed was everything Caroline had never known she wanted. Cade was attentive without being overwhelming, respectful of her work and her independence. He would ride into town to see her whenever he could spare the time from his ranch, and she would visit him in his valley when her schedule allowed. Her father, once he understood Cade's intentions, gave his blessing. "He is a good man," James Porter told his daughter. "Honest and hardworking. He will take care of you." "I do not need someone to take care of me," Caroline said with some asperity. Her father smiled. "I know that, daughter, but it is still nice to have someone who wants to." 6 months after that first kiss in the high meadow, Cade asked Caroline to marry him. They were at his ranch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. He had been unusually quiet all evening, and Caroline had been wondering what was on his mind. "Caroline," he said finally, turning to face her, "I have never been good with fancy words. But I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You have made my life richer in ways I cannot even express. Will you marry me? Will you share this life with me here in this valley?" Caroline felt tears stinging her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Cade, I will marry you." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I have of her. I want you to have it." Caroline held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married in Georgetown on a crisp October day, with half the town in attendance. Mary Henderson came with her husband and baby, wanting to thank the woman who had helped bring her son safely into the world. Caroline's father, though still weak from his illness, walked her down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes. Caroline wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from the meadow where Cade had first kissed her. Cade wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but his eyes never left Caroline's face, and when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. They made their home at Cade's ranch, in the valley with good water and grass. Caroline continued her work as a midwife, traveling throughout the region to help women through their pregnancies and births. Cade supported her fully, never once suggesting that she should give up her calling to focus solely on being a wife. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. She told Cade one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. Cade's face went through a series of expressions, shock and joy and fear all mingled together. "Are you certain?" he asked. "I am a midwife, Cade," Caroline said with a laugh. "I think I know the signs." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "I am terrified," he admitted. "After what happened to your mother, what if something goes wrong?" "Nothing will go wrong," Caroline said firmly. "I know my own body and I know what to watch for. We will be fine." And they were. That winter, on a snowy January night, Caroline gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James after her father, and he had Cade's blue eyes and Caroline's dark hair. Caroline's father died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later, content in the knowledge that his daughter was happy and settled. They buried him in Georgetown, and Caroline grieved, but she also felt a sense of peace. Her father had lived long enough to meet his grandson, to see her happily married and thriving in the country he had brought her to. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Cade worked his ranch, building it into one of the most successful horse operations in the territory. Caroline continued her midwifery practice, gaining a reputation as one of the finest practitioners in Colorado. Little James grew strong and healthy, learning to walk, and then to run through the meadows that surrounded their home. 3 years after James was born, Caroline gave birth to a daughter. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness. 2 years after that came another boy, Robert, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. The years passed, marked by the seasons and the slow, steady growth of the ranch and the children. There were hard times, winters when the snow came early and stayed late, summers when the grass was sparse and they had to drive the horses farther to find good grazing. But there were also times of plenty and joy, celebrations and gatherings with neighbors who had become friends. Caroline never forgot that day on the road when she had collapsed from heat exhaustion, when Cade had found her and carried her to shade and stayed with her until she woke. Sometimes, on summer evenings when the heat reminded her of that afternoon, she would think about how easily things could have gone differently. If Cade had not been tracking mustangs that day, if he had chosen a different route, she might have died there on that dusty road, and none of this life she loved would have existed. "What are you thinking about?" Cade asked her one such evening. They were sitting on the porch of their expanded house, watching their 3 children play in the yard. James was 14 now, already nearly as tall as his father. Sarah was 11, all energy and curiosity. Robert was 9, content with his books and his quiet observations. "I was thinking about the day we met," Caroline said, "about how lucky I am that you found me." Cade reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the sapphire ring she still wore. "I am the lucky one," he said. "You gave me everything I did not even know I wanted. A family. A home that is more than just a place to sleep. Love that makes every day worth living." Caroline leaned her head against his shoulder. "We are both lucky," she said. "Yes," Cade agreed. "We are." Years continued to unfold like pages in a book. James grew into a fine young man who loved horses as much as his father did, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch work. Sarah surprised everyone by developing an interest in medicine, shadowing her mother on calls, and proving to have the steady hands and calm demeanor necessary for the work. Robert discovered a talent for training horses, approaching the work with a patience and gentleness that brought out the best in even the most difficult animals. Caroline and Cade grew older together, their hair turning silver, their faces lined with the marks of time and weather. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, mellowing into something rich and unshakable. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Cade took Caroline back to the meadow where he had first kissed her. It was summer again, and the wildflowers were in full bloom, just as they had been all those years ago. "You remember the first time I brought you here?" Cade asked. "Of course," Caroline said. "You told me you had never met anyone who made you want to give up your solitude." "Best decision I ever made," Cade said. He pulled her close, and they danced slowly in the meadow with no music but the sound of the wind through the grass and the distant call of a hawk. "I love you, Cade Sullivan," Caroline said. "I love you, Caroline Sullivan," Cade replied. Always have, always will. They lived many more years in their valley, watching their children grow and have families of their own. James married a rancher's daughter and gave them 4 grandchildren. Sarah became a renowned physician, traveling throughout Colorado and training other women in modern medical techniques. Robert built his own horse ranch in the next valley over, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to have his independence. When Cade finally passed, he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Caroline holding his hand. She grieved deeply, as anyone would grieve the loss of a love that had defined their life. But she also felt gratitude for the 50 years they had shared, for the life they had built together from that chance meeting on a dusty road. Caroline lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still dispensing medical advice and wisdom to anyone who asked. When she died at 83, she was buried next to Cade in a small cemetery overlooking the valley they had loved. On her headstone, their children had inscribed a simple epitaph. She was brave. He was steadfast. Together they were home. And in that valley where they had built their life, where wildflowers still bloomed every summer and horses still ran through the high meadows, their story lived on. Told by their grandchildren to their great-grandchildren, passed down through generations as a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves begin in the most unexpected ways. All it took was a moment of crisis, a stranger who stopped to help, and the willingness to trust in something bigger than fear or practicality. From that foundation, everything else had grown, a life full of love and purpose, and meaning that neither Cade nor Caroline could have imagined when they first met on that blazing summer day in 1879. Their story was one of thousands that played out across the American West in those years. Ordinary people building extraordinary lives through hard work and determination and love. But to those who knew them, who had been touched by their kindness and inspired by their devotion, Cade and Caroline's love story was anything but ordinary. It was a testament to the power of compassion, to the courage required to open one's heart, and to the profound truth that the best things in life often come when we least expect them. In the end, Caroline's collapse from heat exhaustion, which had seemed like a disaster in the moment, had been the beginning of everything good in her life. And Cade's decision to stop to help, to stay until she woke, had been the moment that transformed him from a solitary rancher into a husband, father, and partner in a love story that would be remembered long after both of them were gone. The ranch they built continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The meadow where Cade proposed became a family landmark, where weddings were held and anniversaries celebrated. And every summer, when the wildflowers bloomed and the heat of the day reminded them of that fateful afternoon, the Sullivan family would gather and remember the story of how it all began, with a cowboy who saw a woman collapse and made the choice to stay.